Hello, and welcome to Today in Geography, a podcast produced by the Department of Geography, Environment, and Spatial Sciences at Michigan State University. Each episode, we talk with members of our community about their research and interests, and then we spend some time spotlighting events and celebrations that have shaped the field of geography. I'm Nathan Moore, an associate professor in the department, and I'll be your host for an engaging exploration of people, places, and stories that shape our world. Today we're marking the birthday of David Harvey, but more about that later in our show. First, I am joined by our student, Mehmet Eroğlu. Thanks, Mehmet, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's get to know a little bit about you and your adventures in geography. How did you find your way to MSU?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because my background is not actually in geography. I am originally from Turkey, and I received my undergrad and master's degrees at Istanbul Technical University. My undergrad was in a program called geomatics engineering. So I'm an engineer by training, but I was always more interested in social aspects of engineering. And then I decided to do my master's in a social science discipline. Well, actually, it was an interdisciplinary program called Science, Technology, and Society. And when I was doing my master's, I had my advisor, and she is an urban planner by training, and she received her Ph.D. degree in the United States. And we were talking about some ideas for my thesis, and I was highly interested in climate policies back then. And she told me, well, Mehmet, you are actually a geographer, but you're not aware of that. And that was the first time I thought, oh, okay, because overall perception of geography is a little different in Turkey. So I never considered myself a geographer before that conversation. And then I started looking for PhD programs in the US. I received a scholarship called Fulbright, and I was going through geography departments, and then I actually realized, there are many people I already read, and I didn't know they were geographers. And but going back to your question, I will say the main reason I decided to come to geography department at MSU was, and still is, my advisor, Karl. He's a political geographer, and he's a very well-known figure in political geographic research on Turkey. And I was very excited to work with him, and I reached out to him. He was extremely kind. We had a Zoom meeting, and we realized we could do so many things together. And then, I decided to do my PhD here in geography at MSU.
One of the big themes in geography is place. And when I think about place, the first thing I think of is home. So where do you consider home, whether that was where you're born or where you live now? And how do you think that sense of your home place has affected the way you look at the discipline of geography?
That's a very deep question. Yeah, because I feel like I have several homes when it comes to the feeling of place. I was born in southern Turkey, a city called Adana. It's a relatively big city, one of the biggest cities in Turkey. And then I moved to Istanbul when I was 18, and I stayed there for about 10 years. So I will say both Adana and Istanbul are my homestays in different ways. But also, when I was doing my undergrad, I spent a year in Thessaloniki, Greece, as an international exchange student. I know it's such a short time, but I really loved Thessaloniki. I really loved people. And I actually had never been to Thessaloniki again after leaving the city, and I still miss that place. And now we also have East Lansing, of course, because it's my... I've spent 40 years in East Lansing. Yeah, that's true. I came in the August of 2021. So all those places impact me in different ways. But what I see common is maybe Adana is not that much where I was born, but Istanbul, Thessaloniki, and East Lansing are both are home to international communities. Istanbul is a very cosmopolitan city. When I was living in Thessaloniki, again, I was an international exchange student, so all of my friends were from different countries. And here in East Lansing, in our program, but also in our the classes I am teaching or TAing for, we always encounter with people from different countries. So I think it helped me a lot. So having an international community in one place really impacted the way I see the world, engaging with different cultures or trying to understand different perspectives. And I believe it helped with my research as well in different ways.
I think that's really important too when you're young. You can really open that up.
I think so, yeah. I think so.
Well, moving forward to where you're at currently, tell me about your research now and how you got focused on this topic.
Well, my research is on is about a power struggle. I consider myself a political geographer, so I am highly interested in the notion of power and how it unfolds in and through space. And currently, my dissertation research is looking at the power struggles between informal miners, private companies, and state institutions in a region called Zonguldak in Turkey. It's the northwestern part of Turkey. It's relatively close to Istanbul, just to give a geographical reference. It's only about 4 hours drive from Istanbul. Well, I started working on that region in Turkey. I don't want to say for a different reason. It's highly a related reason, but my focus was different. When I first came here in 2021, I was learning about Michigan, and I was doing readings, and of course, we are very close to Detroit here, and we visited Detroit a few times with friends, and I was fascinated by the city just like anyone else. And of course, any Michigander will know Detroit is considered the center of deindustrialization studies, industrial decline studies, or like many other places, what we call now Rust Belt. And then when I came here, I had an overall idea about what I want to do, but I didn't have a specific project. And I started exploring projects with my advisor, Karl. And one of the things that was interesting to both of us was the case of Zonguldak, the region I am working on, because Zonguldak coal industry was a state-owned industry. The entire basin was nationalized in the 1930s, and it remained under state control until 1980s. And then state basically said, well, I'm not going to invest in this industry anymore. So what we saw was a gradual industrial decline. Just to give an example, in the 1980s, there were about 40,000 coal miners. And right now, the state-owned company employs about 7,000, maybe 8,000 miners. So thousands of jobs disappeared, and all the other social issues came with that. So what was interesting to me was, well, okay, we saw industrial decline in Detroit or Flint, but it was a decision made by capital. That's why we call it capital flight. But what we see in Turkey is a state-led industrial decline. So I was thinking maybe I can explore this idea. I can see what kind of differences or what kind of the processes we see when we encounter a state-led industrial decline. And so I developed a project about industrial restructuring in Turkey, particularly in that region. And I went to do my fieldwork in the summer of 2022. And I think many people doing fieldwork would understand that you develop ideas before going to your fieldwork, and then what you encounter
threw them out the window.
Entirely different. So, well, I actually knew about informal mining a little bit. I saw it on the news, and there was only one paper published about informal mining in Zonguldak. There is still only one paper published about Zonguldak informal miners. It's not my paper, it's some of the great scholars at the Zonguldak University. But when I went there, I realized, well, it's really common, and people openly talk about this, and many people are engaged with that. And I was like, okay, this is something I can focus on. I don't have to tell the story, another story of industrial decline, but maybe I can tell a story of how people reacted to this or what alternatives people came up with. So that was my starting point, and I did 2 more field works, and again in the summers of 22, 23, 24, and now I'm trying to write my dissertation.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Can you take us on like a little verbal field trip through one of these mines?
Well, so there are three different types of mines, coal mines, and I will say they are drastically different. One is state-owned mines, and they are usually more developed, and they are underground, like 500 meters, 600 meters, something like that. And then there are privately owned mines. Private companies did not exist from 40s to 80s, but they came back to the field through the privatization process in the 1990s. And they are small scale, so they are somewhere between state-owned mines and informal mines because they still follow all the main safety rules of mining, say. And there are informal mines, and these are very close to the ground. And what informal miners do, they work in the groups of 3-5 people. They find the coal and they just dig a very small hole. Because if you go deeper, you need to come up with all the support and you need to spend money on wood. Exactly, yeah. And you don't want to waste your money on this kind of things if you're an informal miner. And so they dig very small holes and they extract the coal and they immediately sell it. So they just keep moving within the basin. They just keep changing where they work. And as a geographer, this is very fascinating to me because this is what they are doing is literally and materially producing and reproducing the landscape. Because they are not only opening mines, they are also building infrastructure in order to distribute the coal they extract. There were some informal miners that show me, do you see this road? Like, we built this because it was very difficult to go to our mine, so we had to come up with a solution.
So you're talking about deindustrialization, and you've gone there and done field work, and then you're also living in Michigan, and you're seeing the deindustrialization and its after effects in this state. Mm-hmm. And you talked about them being either state-run or capital-run, mm-hmm. or capital-caused and state-caused. Can you generalize those differences? How does what you're working on sort of generalize for a global perspective? Is there a typology?
Well, I'm personally not a particularist. I'm actually all about generalizations. So even though I say, well, this is a different kind of deindustrialization, I believe, well, it is different everywhere at the end of the day. Every place has a different culture, background, and historical geography.
Geography is about, yeah.
Exactly. And so for generalizations, yeah, definitely I see a few things. So even though it is important whether it is state-led or capital-led, because state is not only regulator but also employer, so it definitely changes the dynamic of the tension between different groups. But I think what is general is how the power operates, whether it's a state or capital. Those who hold the dominant power, those who can make decisions about how a place should be structured, can easily ignore other imaginations about the place. And this is usually all this the social and economic outcomes of deindustrialization. So in my case, for example, state says, well, I'm not going to extract coal anymore. And people of Zonguldak say, well, if you are not going to do that, we will come up with alternatives. So this is a common thing. It's not always coming up with alternatives, and it's not always success stories. Not that, by the way, I would consider informal mining a huge success story. It comes with so many problems. But I think what we see is a different idea about a particular place, different social groups with different access to political economic power exercise their interest in the place. And out of those conflicts, we get the places in which we live and work. And it is, I believe it's beyond the industrialization. This is an everyday thing, and it's happening through other processes as well.
When you have something like deindustrialization hitting Pittsburgh and Detroit, you always hear about shrinking to greatness or things along those lines. But Zonguldak is not Pittsburgh. Zonguldak is not Detroit. Can Zonguldak shrink? Are there forces that are going to drive bigger global issues like migration that we need to be thinking about?
This is a great question because I think it will bring us to another important geographical concept. So what happened in Zonguldak was a reconfiguration of the space. So the state began reducing investments in the 1980s, and there was a very big strike that took place in the late 1990s. And then there was an event called Ankara March in early 1991. So it started because of a collective agreement. So the miners were not happy with the government's offer, and that's how the strike started. And then there was no solution. And in January of 1991, miners said, well, then we will walk to Ankara, the capital of Turkey, and we will talk to the government face to face. That event ended with a relative success for miners. But what is interesting is in 4 or 5 years following the event, the state turned the province of Zonguldak into 3 different provinces. So Zonguldak was one big province and the population was more than 1 million people. And then state took a few districts and said, well, you know what, these districts can be independent province together. So they first established a different province, and then they established another one. And Zonguldak's population, again, was about 1 million in the 1990, and it was only about 600,000 in 1995. Again, not because of the migration, because...
Divide and conquer.
Exactly. The state changed the scale, and it caused political and economic power, because Zonguldak used to have bigger political representation, and they lost that. They used to have all different industries, and they lost that. And of course, it is still within the same nation state, but the provincial governments have different interests. So it definitely changed the way Zonguldak is structured. And yes, there was a certain level of migration. Some people left the place, but I think because of several reasons, and informal mining is one of them, people didn't leave because people came up with, again, not ideal, but some alternatives. And I think it's important to reflect on, just like you said, Zonguldak, or for that matter, like NST, is different than the other one because how different groups interact, the historical geography or the culture actually impact those processes. But again, the general point, in my opinion, is this is a power struggle and it's happening everywhere, even though the actors or social groups are different. People have different imaginations, and they try to realize those imaginations in place.
Think back about your influences on geography. How has that changed over time?
What do you mean exactly by influence?
Like you started in a different discipline, and then you came to find geography, and I get this sense that your image of what geography can do in terms of describing landscapes of power has been changed over time. Can you explain how some earlier ideas you had, maybe they evolved over time into a different understanding of geographies of power or geographies of place?
Absolutely. Yeah. In the beginning, I was more interested in space as a general concept. And one of the things we already discussed was always in my mind, there are different places, and of course, different places are different. And how can we make sense of this? But the more I read and did field work, I think I started appreciating the importance of material landscape, like how we actually, like if we define the landscape as what we see when we go outside, I think it's very important. Not just what we see, but also what we don't see. And many geographers I read have been very influential in my thinking. Just to name a few, Andrew Harrod, a geographer at the University of Georgia. He's one of the founders of the subfield of labor geography. And Don Mitchell, who used to be at Syracuse University, is in Uppsala right now. And they were talking about the importance of material landscape in different ways, especially when it comes to labor issues or working class communities. And right now it's very influential in my thinking. Again, just to give an example from my fieldwork, you go to relatively rural sites of Zonguldak, and you begin seeing some small mines here or there. So just by looking at these informal mines, you can start thinking about, well, something is happening here. We don't see big mines anymore, but we see small mines. So this is just the beginning of a thought. It's like, okay, things are different. Like, this is not how a typical coal mine should be. But when it comes to material landscape, we can give many examples. Of course, I'm very fascinated by community gardens in Detroit. So this is not something you see in many different parts of the world. And I believe it's about taking a space and transforming it into something else. So you see a community garden, and it's an alternative economic activity. Or more simple examples, we live in East Lansing. I started realizing very recently the city of East Lansing has been extending bike lanes. And this is literally producing space for bikers. And this is being exercised in the material landscape. So just by looking at those things, sometimes it's called reading the landscape. And I completely agree with this idea, but I'm also interested in what we don't see in the landscape. Because when I see bike lanes at some parts of the city, then I also start thinking about, well, we don't have it actually everywhere. Why some places have bike lanes and why some places don't have. And another very important thing is sidewalks. Where we live right now in my neighborhood, we don't have sidewalks.
Because everybody drives.
That's true, but you can see in the material landscape, some people's interests are being realized and some people's interests are being overlooked. So the place favors some people over some other groups. So this is something you can see in the landscape. And to take this point to the next step, I believe we can also think about, well, if the landscapes in which we live and work impact our lives, and I believe as a geographer, they definitely do, I think it will be fair to say, then if we want better lives, maybe we can start thinking about how we can change the landscapes in which we live and work. Maybe that will be a starting point for us to create better lives, more inclusive lives.
Changing the landscapes where you work. That's sort of like the theme of your recent research, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And when we also live, because those things are highly related.
I have one last question for you. Tell me about a geographer or a book that had a real big impact on you.
Yeah, and since we are celebrating the approaching birthday of David Harvey, I think I can talk about David Harvey a little.
Sure.
So I think it is a relatively lazy answer to bring David Harvey about here because I believe he has been the geographer for many since the 70s, 80s, maybe not for all. But so David Harvey is a British-American geographer, and he started his career in the late 60s, early 70s. And I believe as someone who is an admirer of history from below or geography from below, I don't love stories surrounding one person. So I don't want to say David Harvey revolutionized the field, because yes, our discipline was revolutionized in the 70s and 80s, and David Harvey was one of the prominent figures, but there were some other people. Again, just to put, if we have to point out one person, I will go for David Harvey.
That's fine.
Yeah, okay. I believe David Harvey revolutionized the field. He introduced many critical ideas to geography, but also I believe he took many geographical concepts and applied them to different disciplines and fields. So he made a connection between geography and other critical studies. That's why he has been very influential, not only in geography, but also disciplines like sociology, political science, urban studies, and economics for sure. And I believe I read Harvey more than another geographer in my life. He has many books, and another one is coming out next year. He has some books I really enjoy, and he has some books I don't enjoy that much, but I still use in my research. And he has some other books that make me feel like I have no idea what's happening here. But the book I want to suggest today is one of his books that was published in 2001, and it has the collection of essays he published from 70s to 90s. The book is titled Space of Capital Towards a Critical Geography. And I think it's a great introduction for those who are not familiar with David Harvey. So at this point, I'm talking to non-geographers, I guess. And the reason I am talking about this book right now is I think people can find different interests in this book. So they don't have to read the entire book. They can go find the essays or papers they are interested in and start with that chapter. But the very first chapter is an interview he gave, and I will recommend reading it just to see what he means by critical geography, or how he defines critical geography. And again, sometimes I feel like I am doing Ph.D. in geography, not only but mostly thanks to David Harvey and that movement of making geography a critical discipline. So I'm grateful for everything he does, and we should celebrate his birthday, which is approaching. So it's a nice opportunity to talk about David Harvey here.
Happy birthday, David Harvey.
Happy birthday to David Harvey.
Mehmet, thank you very much for coming in today and talking about your research. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, let's take a moment for a word from our sponsor. Are you looking to revamp your current career, earn continuing education credits, or simply learn some new and marketable geospatial skills? Consider enrolling in our OnGeo professional certificate program at Michigan State University. Our courses are fully online and can be combined in groups of 4 classes to earn a professional certificate in GIS or geospatial data analytics and visualization. Our courses are designed by professional geographers to develop your geographic awareness and geospatial technology skills while expanding your career opportunities. Topics include geographic information, global positioning systems or GPS, graphic and map design, aerial image interpretation, geospatial analysis, ethics, trends, and geovisualizations. We even have data analytics, spatial statistics in Python, ArcPy, and open source geoprocessing, and more. There's no application fee. Sessions are offered 6 times a year. All courses are fully online and utilize the latest software and geospatial technologies. Visit ongeo.msu.edu to register today and start your adventure in GIS. Find a link in the show notes to learn more. So that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks for listening to Today in Geography from MSU's Department of Geography, Environment, and Spatial Sciences. Be sure to subscribe and share, and join us next time as we continue exploring the people, places, and stories that shape the world around us.